It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be able to come to the conference. This paper is co-authored with Rick Hanishek, who's here, Andrew Morgan, who's a graduate student of mine at UIC. That should be Lauren. I think we added a T. Sartain, who was at the Consortium for School Research in Chicago, but who's now at University of North Carolina. And Jeff Scheiman, who's at Georgia Southern. So schooling is a quasi-public good. The private return to schooling is determined by educational attainment, earnings, and other measures of labor market success. And the public return to schooling probably weights those social outcomes, and breakthroughs in science and technology and creativity more heavily. There's ongoing discussion somewhat related to this point over the relative importance of the development of cognitive. Economists aren't very clever, so it's cognitive or non-cognitive skills for different dimensions of the private and public returns to schooling. I'm not going to talk about this much, but there's a growing body of evidence, including work by Jim Heckman and co-authors and Raj Chetty and co-authors, that improvements in cognitive and non-cognitive outcomes persist for a long time. U.S. education policy has placed a lot of emphasis on cognitive skills and achievement, I think for good reason, because it's very difficult to measure non-cognitive skills, and their measurement would probably lead to a lot of opportunistic behavior and water down whatever it is the goal was to develop. Bo Jackson's, I would say recent work, it's becoming less recent, finds that high school teacher effects on achievement and these behavioral skills are not highly correlated to one another, but he's going to come back to this today. And that the behavioral or non-cognitive skills have a stronger relationship with a number of measures of attainment into the future. And the question, and I was surprised seeing that for the first time, and I guess one of the questions we have is there a trade-off between the development of these various types of skills? Is it different at different schooling levels? And if so, are the incentives introduced by accountability systems and in other things, like the way we evaluate teachers, somewhat misaligned with what we really care about? Because my thought, in elementary school and middle school is you have to teach behavioral skills in order to get the kids to sit school, not disrupt other people and be distracted themselves in order for them to learn. So that's why I think, at least at those grade levels, we had pretty strong priors that we should find that in schools that were developing one type of skills, they were also typically developing the other. Okay, I'm going to skip the body of research on school leadership, but that there is a growing body of research that principles are important, and this extends beyond schools into the private sector and in terms of upper level management and the like. But it's also difficult to measure. So in this paper, we asked the following research questions. First, we're going to estimate the variation in principal effects in the development of cognitive skills, which is going to be middle school or the middle school years achievement growth in mathematics and reading. Then we're going to look at their effects on some non-cognitive skills, which we measure in 9th grade, because it's important that these aren't measured at the same time as the principle we're interested in, particularly disciplinary infractions. And then we're going to look at longer term outcomes. High school GPA being an intermediary outcome, college attendance, college persistence, and we actually have workforce data for Texas, so we can see if someone's doing something productive. I was a student of Finus Welch's, and Finus had this term SEM, school, employment, or in the military. We don't know about the military, so we're going to see if somebody's in school or at work. We're also in the midst of obtaining data on criminal involvement in the criminal justice system, so that gives us an opportunity to look at whether principles in developing these skills are going to influence whether the kids later in life are involved in criminal activity. And we're going to investigate the relationships between the effects on skill development and on longer term outcomes in a similar way to what Bo Jackson did on high school teachers. It's not easy, right, to attribute things to principles. There's unobserved differences among students across schools. We have a rich set of controls, including not only prior test scores, but their absences in the case of Texas in 5th grade, or 6th grade when we're looking at the middle school, and middle schools could be 6 through 8 or 7 through 8. There's school shocks that affect student outcomes. And the thing about principals as opposed to teachers is you can't compare two principals at the same time running the same school. And so we have to keep that in mind. There's school factors not under the control of the current principal, and what we're going to do is demean by the average principal effect for each school. So we're looking at the relative productivity of one principal versus the other in the same school. And middle school kids go to high school, and we're looking now not only at high school outcomes, but post-secondary schooling outcomes. So one of the things we have to worry about is what's the quality of the high school? That's where these kids just generally go, because these are neighborhood schools, and also the quality of the middle school education may influence where somebody goes to high school. And so what we're going to do is we're going to compare kids essentially who went to different middle schools but end up in the same high school. We're doing this for Chicago, CPS, the Chicago Public Schools, and for Texas. The Chicago data, Chicago schools are structured K to 8. All the elementary schools are K to 8. Since we need a starting point in which to compare students, the first test scores we have is grade 3. So we're going to look at conditional on what the students are doing in grade 3. How do they do between grades 4 and 8? We've got math and reading scores, high school GPA in Chicago, which we don't have in Texas, and a lot of staff information that we can use to figure out who is the principal. This took a lot of work because we didn't have principal IDs. A lot of principals, particularly women principals, changed names. And so Jeff Scheinman did a lot of work on this. And we have some national clearinghouse data so we can look at whether kids are in college and whether they're continuing. Texas data cover a similar 20-year period. The data for Texas can be linked with 2 post-secondary data sets, so we're hoping to link it with their Department of Public Safety data. We've got data on whether they're in Texas higher education, and we've got data whether they're working in Texas. It's the data that's used by the Texas Unemployment Compensation System. So in Texas, there's 1,491 principals and 714 middle schools. So it's really big, which is nice in terms of statistical power. Okay, so we take principal spells that are long enough to encompass a student's entire middle school career in Texas, or grades 4 to 8 in the CPS, to limit complications introduced by persistence of principal effects. You know, it gets very difficult. In our other work, we look at annual gains, so we're focusing on just which principal was there at the point in time. But here, when you're looking at longer term effects, we really want to focus on kids who had the same principal throughout middle school. We drop years in which CPS students could have a long-serving principal in the early grades and a different long-serving principal from grades 4 to 8, right? If somebody was in the school for a long time, you know, we would have them in 4 to 8, and then they retire when some of those kids are just leaving 3rd grade. They would have influenced those kids in kindergarten through 3rd grade. We put them with a different principal in 4th grade. That creates a problem. So we have no principals in our data who influenced kids in the early grades of another principal who then is also in our data for the later grades. We limit the sample to students who remain in the same school and progress with their class. The estimate of the effectiveness of a principal for each outcome is constructed in a similar way. Consider, for example, the estimated effect on 8th grade mathematics achievement of the principal of a grade 6 to 8 middle school. And a similar method is used to estimate the principal effects on all the other outcomes. Okay, what this is we run a regression of 8th grade score on a cubic polynomial of 5th grade scores, on lots of characteristics of the kids, on whether the kids move during, not mobility for this one, but lots of characteristics of the kids, and high school fixed effects. So that ultimately, actually, I'm sorry, not high school fixed effects for these. Yeah, high school fixed effects, even for these. And then what we do is for schools in which is almost all the schools that we use, it is all the schools that we use, we have a estimate of a principal fixed effect for principal A. We have an estimate of a principal fixed effect for principal B who served in the school at a different point in time. We take the average of those two, or we may even have three, and we demean them. And so what we're really looking at is the within elementary school variation in principal effectiveness based upon comparisons of kids who end up at, a high school along with kids from other middle schools. So I think this level of comparison really accounts for a lot of the unobserved differences among kids and also unobserved differences among schools that persist over time. Okay. The estimated effect is essentially the difference between average 8th grade achievement and predicted 8th grade achievement given the student characteristics and high school attended. So a more positive coefficient indicates a principal is more effective at raising that achievement. And in our preferred specifications, we compute the average in each elementary school and take the deviation. Okay, so we'll present 3 sets of estimates. We're going to look at the variances, 5 minutes. Okay, the variances, correlations among these estimates, and then some regressions, which I want to make sure to get to. Okay. So here's the standard deviations, which are a little bit hard to interpret. If you go to the final column is really the full estimates. And what you see here are estimates of principal fixed effects, like a 1 standard deviation movement of principal quality on any of these outcomes. So moving from the center of the distribution, 1/3 of the way up the distribution, has an effect which is about 1/10 of a standard deviation of the overall distribution measured at the student level. Now, we think this is too big because there's measurement error and random shocks. And so what we do, I'm going to skip the ones for Chicago, is we take principals who serve for a long time and we divide their spells in the middle, and then we treat them as 2 separate principals, and we redo the same exercise and estimate how much within school variation there is in principal effectiveness. But of course, there's no within school variation in who the principal is. We're making it up. We're comparing the same principal early in her career and later. And we're saying this is kind of the counterfactual of what would happen if there were no variation in principal quality, which probably overstates it because people change in their quality as a principal. And that explains about half of these effects. So our effect size is, for example, the standard deviation for math is about 0.05, which is pretty comparable to what we've seen in other estimates. And these effects are small in magnitude, but remember they influence all the kids in the school, and these accumulate over time. Now, what we'd like to show now, I don't have much time, is the correlations of the effects on various cognitive and non-cognitive skills and how they correlate with longer term effects. So these numbers, for example, the 0.44, the upper leftmost number, looks at the correlation between the principal effect on 8th grade achievement from the full specifications with the effect on math score in 9th grade. We see that is positive. If you go to the bottom one that controls for prior absences, what you can see is the estimated effect on 8th grade achievement, go over to the 3rd column, has a correlation of -0.28 with the estimated effect on absences in 9th grade. So unlike what we saw in Carabo-Jackson's work, we're seeing that principals who do a better job of raising achievement are also doing a better job of reducing absences. And if you go to the final column, that's the probability of having any disciplinary infraction in 9th grade. Again, the principals who do a better job raising math achievement also do a better job reducing disciplinary infractions. So what I'd like to do now is to go and spend a little time on these regressions, the time we have left. So we're going to regress now the long-term outcomes, the principal effects on the probability of attending college, the probability of persisting into the 2nd year of college, and the probability of either working or attending college in a specified time period after your class would be expected to graduate high school. And we're going to regress those on our measures of principal effects on both cognitive and non-cognitive skills, and basically see which ones seem to be more strongly related to their effects on long-term outcomes. Okay, so we take our long-term outcomes. We're going to focus here on college persistence and whether you work or attend college. And the top panel are the value added to the cognitive skills. And what you can see with the college persistence, there's multicollinearity between value added to math and reading. If we drop the reading, the math still is highly significant. So math achievement value added of a principal seems strongly related to college persistence. Interestingly, the principal's value added to cognitive skill growth is not significantly related at all to the probability a student works or attends college in the period after high school. However, if you go to the bottom ones, you can see that the principal's effects on future absences are negative and significantly related to college persistence, and negative and significantly related to the probability of working or attending college. Also, the principal's effect, so the middle school principal's effect on your probability of getting a disciplinary infraction in 9th grade is also negatively and significantly related to the principal's effect on the probability you work or attend college after high school. So I think you kind of have two different things. You have doing something productive, and it seems to be more strongly related to how principals affect your development of non-cognitive skills, and progressing in college, which is much more related to principal effects on, on math, cognitive skills, as well as on non-cognitive skills. And I'll stop there.